Welcome to Balmer's Workshop, and thanks so much for joining me here once again. It is always nice to have you back. So I mentioned last time that I had surpassed 1,000 subscribers, which for me is a huge milestone, and I just want to thank all my subscribers once again. It makes such a huge difference, and the support is really appreciated. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider it if you find the content worthy. So here we go with part 4, the final part of this Suzuki Grand Vitara rear bumper build. In part 3, we finished up by creating the side sections for the bumper, as you see here. We also created a top plate and got that all fit up and working just right. And we fit the bumper to the vehicle once again, made sure everything was the way we wanted it. We pulled it off the vehicle, braced it for welding, and we began the welding process and did a little bit of sanding. In this episode, we will complete all of the welding now that the bumper is braced, and also we're going to go into great detail on sanding, blending out your welds to create nice smooth radiuses and really straight lines. So basically you're getting a finishing clinic in this episode. Hopefully you get a lot out of it. And if you have any comments or questions, please do use the comment section below. I always try to get back to any comments that require a reply, and I always try to answer any questions my viewers have. And there we are. I have sanded flat the top side welds. I forgot to do these guys. I'll do those in a minute. But what I wanted to show you is, even though I feathered my weld out in this direction quite a lot, there is still a depression in here. So when you're dealing with square tube, it's obviously got a radius at the corner, and that radius starts fairly far back. It's kind of deceiving. It doesn't appear to be that way, but you can certainly see it here where I've got a nice polished surface on both sides and a depression in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and re-weld that, not re-weld it, but weld over that. I'll use a little less power and a little more wire just to fill that up as quickly as possible. And then we'll sand it down again, and we should have a really nice, precise angle at that point. So I have welded over those depressed areas with some pretty ugly beads. I mean, they're very competent beads. There's nothing wrong with them. There's absolutely no porosity. But my point with that was to show you that they do not have to be perfect beads when all you're going to do is grind them off anyway. As long as there's no porosity in there and they fill what you want them to fill, they are just fine. So after sanding, that's what my second run looks like. I still have a depressed area, but this time I am not going to fill it with weld. I'll give you a little explanation. Again, when you're dealing with rectangle tube, the flat surface is not truly flat. Basically what happens is when this is extruded, you're going to have a radius here, a small depression in this area, a proud area here, a small depression in this area, and then your radius again. It's just the way it happens. It's barely visible, but this is a great illustration of it right here. So right in that area is your depressed, the lowest portion of the tube. This is less than a millimeter, in fact less than half a millimeter. I mean, this is, I would say, a 32nd, maybe even a 64th of an inch deep. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sanding disc, and I've mentioned this in other videos. These are phenomenal. If you're going to be blending out welds and trying to make a decent looking radius, you got to have some good tools to do it. One of them is a grinder with a sanding disc on it. Another one is another grinder, or the same grinder if you're willing to switch your gear out, with a blending disc on it. This is a really used blending disc, often referred to as a flapper disc. There's a brand new one. These are what you want to use to create your radius and finish your welds up to a nice, crisp, clean finish. So we'll go over that a little bit later, but for now, let's continue on with this sanding disc. And what I'm going to do is just use, now let me see if I can get the camera in a decent position. Generally, you're going to use a sanding disc like this to create as flat a surface as you possibly can, which obviously you're going to keep it as very flat to the material that you're working. But in this case, because there is a very slight natural depression as this tube goes down, what I'm going to do is just increase the angle of my grinder so that I very slightly work into that depression, and I'm going to relieve the rest of this this rough area, and it's going to be a nice smooth finish. I'll put the camera on the tripod so you can see me doing that. And one other thing I should mention first is with the backing plates for these guys, this is a 4.5-inch grinder, but I run a 5-inch disc on it. That way I've got a 1/2-inch overlap on here. If I ran a 4-inch disc on there, 4.5-inch, sorry, disc on this, then I'd be running right to the very edge of my stiff backing plate. And then when I wanted to create a soft radius, there'd be no ability for this disc to flex. However, if I use a disc that's slightly too big for the backing plate, it can flex, just like you see there. And when you're working something, and you can use that flex to your advantage to create a very, very gentle curve. And that's what we're going to do here. So again, I'll put you on the tripod, and you can watch how it's done. All right, so I'm about to go ahead and blend this, or sorry, sand this out so that it's got a really nice clean finish to it. One thing I should have mentioned, I'm going to change my disc, so I've got a brand new sanding disc on here. The other one was still in reasonably good shape, and I'll use it for some other projects later when I'm just trying to create a perfectly flat surface. But since I'm trying to finish this, and I don't want to take off any more material than I need to, what I want to do is use a brand new disc that's going to require very minimal pressure from me, and this should clear this up real quickly. So stick with me and let's see what it can do. So you can see this area is almost completely finished. I'm not sure if it's clear on the camera or not, but there's just a few deeper scratches in this area than anywhere else, which shows me that I'm thousandths of an inch from being flat here. And there's just a little crest here. So what I'm going to do is, since this depression is a little deeper, I'm basically going to take more material off of this edge here. So I'm just applying a bit more pressure on this side of the grinder than I am on this side of the grinder, while still keeping it on a bit of an angle to deal with that depression. So I'm going to run it right in this area rather than straight over the depression. And there you go. Pretty clean. There's a couple of very small pock marks that I can weld up, and then I'll just do a finish sand over everything. If you're trying to cover over a little pock mark, a little missed weld area like I just did there, don't start your weld directly in what you're trying to fill. Start just beside it and then run over to it and fill that area, because as you know, if you've done some welding, you don't always get a perfect contact immediately. You get a little bit of chatter, and you don't want that to be happening on what you're trying to fill, because of course you're going to wind up with a void again, most likely. So you start beside the depression or the hole until you have absolutely no chatter, and then migrate over onto it and fill the hole. All right, so I wound up actually creating another undercut. That's what that is. It's undercut from when the weld arc initially bites. It creates a pool, and it's going to do a little undercut when it's really hot. So I'm going to turn down my temperature, my voltage on the welder a little bit, and again I'll migrate over to this guy, fill it up, and hopefully that's the last we need to do. But you can see the rest of it is really nice and clean now. Much better. So that is absolutely acceptable. And now the next thing I'm going to do, obviously, is sand these guys down. But in terms of for these specific welds, the next thing that'll happen is we'll blend them out with the flap disc like I showed you. But I think I'm going to do that after I've made all my other welds. We'll leave it with nice sharp angles, and then we'll come back and blend out the whole bumper as one. Here you see me welding up the side portions of the bumper. These are thinner material than the main sections of the bumper are made of. They are 10 gauge, which I believe is 130 or 135 of an inch. So a little more susceptible to warpage, and you might often expect to see those welded together with little stitch welds or even a series of tack welds, whereas I ran full weld beads. The reason being is because I braced this bumper well enough that I don't think there's going to be any issues with warpage. So there's your explanation. Another note about sanding out welds. I've sanded out all the welds on this corner, and you can see that I've got really nice, clean, sharp lines now, and no porosity on any of them. If there was porosity, I would absolutely grind that out and re-weld. I will show you one spot where there is, right over here. Let's see if I can get the camera right for you, but you can just see the tiniest little bit of porosity in here and also down here. So I'm going to grind all this out and re-weld all that, because we all make mistakes, but we don't let our mistakes leave the shop. That's the key. So anyway, if you do find any porosity in your welds, make sure you get rid of that, because when you send your product out for sandblasting, it's going to open up that porosity and make it look worse. And you just don't want to be sending out flawed products or having a flawed product on your own vehicle. So you wind up with nice lines like that, you know that you can go ahead and blend them out with a flap disc and call it a day. But what I wanted to point out to you is, so that you know how far to go with your sanding, basically this is absolutely finished. So this gray area here, this is called mill scale. This is a very, very hard product that's on the outside of hot rolled steel. When you weld, obviously you're welding through that mill scale, or you can grind it off first and weld weld a mill scale free seam. But generally you're going to still have mill scale very, very close to your weld, or even at the edges of your weld. So when you blend your weld down, the weld itself will blend down more easily than the mill scale will. So once you get to the point that you're virtually at the mill scale, I'll bring you over here, because this one I have left at that point. So once you get very close, and you can see if you look down the profile, that's almost finished in terms of sanding. But along the bottom here, we've got just a little lip, and this is the very edge of my weld that I've left. So when I'm sanding out a weld, I'll start with usually a new sanding disc, or a sanding disc that's in reasonably good shape, to take the majority of the weld out, as you see here. But once I get to this point and I have just the slightest bit of weld left, and I'm not perfectly flush with my surface, I'll switch out to a brand new sanding disc, and then that way I can apply very, very little pressure on my passes. The more pressure you have to apply, thanks to having a worn disc, the more you're going to shape your material. Of course, we're trying to create a beautiful flat surface here, so you want to use as little pressure as possible. So a brand new disc is definitely what you want to use. And when you're doing it, you can see here that the grinder rotates in this direction. So I want to be going like this with my passes, not like this. And the reason being is because I'm putting the pressure that I am putting is obviously at this tip. So if I go this way, I'm actually going to be knocking off this edge constantly and creating a slight radius that I don't want. I want to make a radius later when I'm ready to do that, but not now. Right now I want to create a crisp corner. And so I'm going to go this way and draw the grinder in this direction, which allows the disc to travel like this and pull all that weld out without beveling the edge at all. Also, you only want to, when you put your brand new disc on and take off this last little bit, you only want to go as far as you absolutely have to. So as soon as you see this little line disappear and you get what looks like up here, then you are done. So I'm going to take the camera off the tripod to make sure you can see what I'm talking about. So if we look under here, you can see that there's a ridge. But if we look up here, you can see that it's completely smoothly blended out. There's absolutely no ridge whatsoever. And that's the point you want to stop at. You don't want to go much further than that, because if you do, all you're doing is removing more mill scale than necessary and just wearing out your consumables. Your sanding discs won't last very long at all. So only go as far as you need to, but do make absolutely sure that you've gotten rid of all of the edge of your weld, because that will show through in the powder coat afterwards. And that's it. I'll take you off the tripod and show you again. You should be able to see that that is now totally feathered out. No weld line left whatsoever. And a nice, crisp, clean set of lines to work with for when I want to come back and blend these out using a flap disc. The blending has begun. So you can see these lines have a really nice even radius on them now, and so does this one. But this one is still razor sharp. I have the bumper positioned a little too high for me to comfortably work on that one right now, so I'll just lower the bumper after I do the other corner, and we'll blend that out. For blending, I use a flat disc on a grinder, such as this. This is a 5-inch, and I use 36 or 40 grit blending discs. They work very, very well. You want to use either a brand new one or a very close to brand new one like this, so you've got almost all of the grit still remaining on your on your flaps, so that you get a really nice, aggressive blend. Much like the sanding discs, if you use a worn out one, you're going to wind up applying a lot of pressure, and you're going to shape the metal when you don't want to shape the metal, rather than just, or shape the metal in a way that you don't want to shape the metal in, I should say, rather than creating a really nice smooth radius. So that's what you use. I'll do some time lapse of this next one. The bumper is all sanded out, and I've chamfered the holes for the rear mounts as well. You'll see on time lapse that I used a flap wheel on a die grinder to do that, and it worked out very nicely, as you can see. Is complete, and now I'm adding a VHF antenna mount. As you can see, it lines up very nicely with the back side of the bumper, nice straight line up, and it lines up really nicely on all the other faces. So we'll weld that in, 1/2-inch hole there for the antenna mount, and then a 3/4 inch, or I think that might even be 13/16 hole for the wire to feed through, just to make things a little easier. Give it a bigger hole on the back side. There you are. I will weld that up, add the top plate. I think I'll probably just tack the top plate on for now, install the bumper, make sure everything fits exactly the way I want, remove the bumper one last time, add the top plate, and I'm also going to add some tabs to the inside of this guy, probably 3 or 4 tabs that just have a 1/4 inch mounting hole, so that the customer can run a piece of rubber in between the body and the bumper if he wants to keep mud and dirt out of there. But that is just about that. One other thing I wanted to mention, this gap here, the tube is completely capped, so there's no worry about water ingress into the tube, but that is a really tight little angle in there. I'm not sure that my powder coater will get all the way into there with his primer and powder coat, so what I'm going to do is run some automotive seam sealer in that gap once it gets back from powder coat, just to make sure that it's perfectly sealed and we don't have any rust issues from there. And there she is. I removed the little antenna mount from the bumper briefly. I welded up the seams, and I blended them out, and she's looking real nice. I used my magnet to make sure that I was nice and flush with the face of the bumper, and I tacked it at this bottom corner right here. Then I made sure that it was sitting perfectly 90 degrees to this face of the bumper, and I tacked the top corner, and now I'm ready to weld it in, and I will leave all those welds exposed except for this one, which I'll blend out so we have a nice smooth transition into the face of the bumper there. Back on the vehicle, all blended out, antenna mount finished, and it fits up really, really well. So thanks to all that extensive bracing I did during weld up, we have a very, very clean fit up. Almost no dimensional change whatsoever. My gaps remain very, very even, and I'm really happy with the way it's worked out. So now that I know that I haven't had any warpage issues with my weld up, I can go ahead and place that top plate on there, tack it in position, make sure I'm happy with the way that it looks, remove the bumper from the vehicle one last time, fully weld the top plate and add the recovery points and fully weld them as well, and send this bumper off for sandblast, fusion bonded rust resistant primer, and textured black powder top coat. Plate is back in place and tacked in position. All I have to do now is tighten up this gap just slightly, and I'll do that once it's off the vehicle with a clamp, but everything fits up really nice. Super happy with it. So the only other thing I have to do, as I have noted there, is make some tabs, which I've already made them, but I have to add them on, and they are going to go inside the bumper in along this edge here. And the reason for that is so that the customer can run a piece of rubber across from here to the bumper to kind of bridge this gap and keep as much debris out as possible. And then of course he'll be able to remove that rubber flap to spray in there and clean out the bumper area and all the rear quarter panel area as well. The top plate is fully welded. I have changed the bumper position obviously, but I'm pretty happy with that bead. It's the most exposed bead, or these are the most exposed beads, I should say, on the entire bumper. So I've done my best to keep them nice and consistent. And although they are not absolutely perfect, and I am not the greatest welder in the world or on YouTube, they're not bad. I'm pretty happy with those. Now what I'm going to do is the very, very last of the welds, and that is placing the recovery points, which I have right here. And in order to place them, I want to make sure that they are dead 90 degrees to the bottom of this bumper so they look nice and square. And because I have so many little obstacles and stuff on the bottom, I can't put a square against it very easily. And the top is, of course, checker plate and has a weld seam along it, or weld bead along it rather. So you really can't trust that to be flat. So what I've done is I have clamped a piece of angle iron to the bottom of the bumper, and I have now run a square along it and draw myself a line. Alright, so now I know that I've got a really nice 90-degree line to follow for welding up my recovery points. When I weld this in, I've actually gone over that seam that I've already welded, and that gives me double insurance against any cracking or anything like that on a blended weld. Obviously it's always better to leave your welds intact if you can rather than grind them away so that you've got more holding material, but in this case I'm actually going to be doubling up my welds by placing my recovery point right over that seam, and the recovery point is going to get multi-pass welded. It'll have 2 passes on it to make sure we have enough penetration, so you can be assured that there will be no issues with that weld that exists underneath the recovery point once she's done. Happy day! The bumper is back from powder coat and it's looking great. As usual, I am very happy with the job Valley Powder Coat has done. They're always very thorough, and this bumper is certainly no exception. Turned out really good. This is a textured black powder coat, and underneath that black powder coat is a rust-resistant fusion bonded primer. And of course, before any of that is applied, the bumper is sandblasted thoroughly to make sure that it has a very, very good surface ready to accept the coating. But there you are. I'm really happy with it, like I said. I think it's turned out great, and it should look awesome on the vehicle. So I'm going to go ahead and put you on time lapse now and install this thing, and we'll even install the little VHF antenna that goes in there, as it is hanging down here ready for me to work with. So we'll get it all buttoned up in just a few minutes here. Is on. Everything went well. A couple small adjustments to get this VHF antenna mount sorted out just properly, but she's turned out really good. Quite happy with that. Fit up works out well. You can see that the bumper lines up almost perfectly with the outsides of the fender flares, and my gaps are reasonably even. This one is a little bit weird, like I pointed out earlier. Depending on how you stand, the gap looks different, as in right now the gap looks big at the back. Right now the gap looks big at the front, but if you stand at the side, the gap looks correct. So I really just didn't know what other way to do it. Again, I could have done a straight line underneath here, but it also would look weird. So that's the best I could come up with. I hope the customer's happy. I hope you guys like it. I think it's pretty decent. Now all we got to do is put a spare tire on the back of this thing, and she's a wrap. So let's do that now. And that is a wrap not only for the bumper, but for this video series. And I really thank you for sticking through the whole way. Your support is genuinely appreciated. The next video, I believe, will be focused around a rear center section replacement for a Nissan Xterra. That converts the rear bumper into a swing-away rear bumper with an integral receiver. So please come back and have a look at that one. That particular bumper is actually featured in an online magazine, which is super exciting for me. So I'll include a link to that in the video once I put it up, so you can have a look at it in the magazine as well as here on YouTube. Thanks again, everybody, for all your support. Thanks for the likes. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the subscriptions. We'll see you again next time.